Okay, so thank you to Amanda Healy, who has joined us today for the International Business Podcast. Amanda is a Managing Director at Kirrikin. But before we start, I'd like to give an acknowledgement of country. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we work and live and recognise their continuing connection to land, water and community. We pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Amanda Healy. Amanda is an Aboriginal Indigenous woman who has had a long and successful career in the mining sector. She is also a successful entrepreneur, having managed and operating a number of successful businesses, including an engineering firm, which she later sold, and then later establishing two impactful social enterprises, making her an inspirational Indigenous business leader. Amanda is an AACSB influential leader and managing director of Kirrikin, which is the business that we will focus on today. And she has had a number of awards, including the prestigious 2014 Indigenous in Business Award, the 2016 Western Australia E-Commerce Award, and she has been nominated as a national finalist in the Export Industry Awards in 2018. Amanda has also been a finalist in the Telstra Businesswoman of the Year Awards. She has an MBA and has also been awarded an honorary doctorate from Curtin University. I'm sure there's other awards that are not mentioned there as well. So today we're going to focus on one of those successful businesses that Amanda runs, Kirrikin, which creates both beautiful and wearable art that provides a sustainable income for Aboriginal artists in remote communities. Kirrikin is a for-purpose social enterprise funding a range of development programs and profit sharing with Aboriginal artists. Personally, I find Amanda's story inspirational for everyday people, but most importantly for the Indigenous people of Australia. And so this is just a little picture of some of the clothing that Kirrikin sell. So I think this is the resort wear. So over to you, Amanda, just to ask you the first question, what does Kirrikin do?
Hiya. I'm located here in beautiful Boorloo in Western Australia, more commonly known as Perth. And I just would like to also acknowledge the traditional owners of this country, which is the Whadjuk Noongar people, who've kept this place in such beautiful condition for so many thousands of years. So big thank you and big acknowledgement to them. My people are from the Hunter Valley in New South Wales, and I've grown up here in Western Australia. So Kirrikin is a word from my people, meaning your Sunday best clothes. And it was inspired because of my background in the mining industry. I was often called on to do talks to bigger businesses in the mining industry, explaining why you would want to include Aboriginal or Indigenous businesses in your supply chain. What was the purpose of that? So I often went looking for things to represent who I was, you know, like working in the industry, and a woman of my age, I always wear a lot of dark colours, so it was nice to brighten it up with something bright. So I went looking for some Indigenous scarves and found there was, at that time, so we're talking about between 2008 and 2010, very, very little available on the market that was actually made in Australia and had authentic Indigenous engagement in them. So I complained about it for a few years to anyone who would listen. And then in ultimately 2013, started talking about it and set up the business, and started in 2014. So it was set up as a social enterprise, really just around making sure that we got some funds back to the artists involved, but also to do a couple of things like change the view of Aboriginal people, change the view of our culture, to actually present our culture in a luxurious way, and the stories that our culture, that holds our culture. All of the artists involved in Kirrikin paint either, like in traditional methodology or contemporary interpretations of ancient stories, or are celebrating things like our medicinal leaves, or important food sources, or water sources, or song lines, those sorts of things that have become incredibly important to our people to hold on to. So it became obvious that as I spoke to those people, that there was so much more that needed to be done to help Aboriginal people just feel better about themselves for a start, but also to promote that this culture, my culture, is actually rich and beautiful and very meaningful. It's ancient and understands our environment, this country we live on, better than anyone else ever will. So that's been a really interesting challenge, and we, I'm not sure that we've got it right yet, but we're certainly working towards it. And there's a small group of us now, Indigenous fashion designers, doing work in this space. So it's pretty awesome, and I'm loving seeing the changes and understanding how everything's happening and how different people interpret things. So it's great. It's awesome.
Yeah. And it's such a lovely product. I really, enjoyed looking on the Kirrikin website and all the beautiful clothing that you have there, and the scarves and so on.
Thank you.
Yeah. So again, you've kind of answered this question, but how did your Indigenous background influence the establishment of this business, and how does it assist other people in the Aboriginal community?
So I guess that in the first instance, one of the things that's important is that we're a business like any other, and we, our purpose is to make money, and the purpose and what we do with that money is push it back to the community. And I guess that's a unique thing about Indigenous businesses, is there is always a very strong community component. Profits, really, most of us share it within our family groups or broader community one way or another. So for a start, that's, that's sort of deeply cultural. It's something that's existed in our culture for, tens of thousands of years, and it's sort of innate in all of the businesses that we set up. Of course, there's, there is internal political protocols and cultural protocols that sometimes impact on what I do, and sometimes impact on what I end up printing on fabric and stuff. But for me, it's very much around honouring my culture. My great grandmother and my grandmothers were not able to do that, weren't able to acknowledge who they were. It was, as many of you will be aware, it was illegal at that time for them to, practice their culture and to, to talk in language, and all of those sorts of things were forbidden by law. And so it's nice that we're able to honour it now and actually start to see some revitalisation of that. And it makes me very proud that we can have a small part, or play a small part in that.
Yeah, oh, that's fantastic. Okay, so the podcast today is on international business, because I'm an international business lecturer. So what informed your decision to go international, and what international activities do you currently engage in?
Sure. So I guess that we are still at a stage in our country where Aboriginal culture, artwork, and items, I guess, aren't broadly accepted. In fact, I often, so there's groups that are immediate allies. They love, they love hearing our stories. They understand what's happened. They, they really support us whenever they can. Then there's the next group that sort of really is thinking about it and want to, but they approach me and say, well, look, I don't feel comfortable wearing your stuff because it's Aboriginal. what are you, so there's those sorts of things impact on. And then of course there's a third group who just go like, no, what you talk is rubbish and there was no such thing as racism and you people weren't here and blah blah blah. So yeah, well, all these stories, right?
Yes.
And I think the first group is increasing quite dramatically, actually, what we refer to as allies. Or supporters. So I guess that, and in some ways, I think most fashion designers in Australia would say it's almost like you've got to make it overseas before you can make it here in Australia.
Yeah.
I believe there's an element of that about it, that people don't really take local designers seriously that much. I think also that's changing. In fact, the last couple of years, we've seen a bit of a swing back to the, where is it being made? Is this an Australian product? Blah, blah, blah. But having said all that, I didn't intentionally set out to hit overseas markets. We listed first off, when I set up the business, we were on Shopify. Our e-commerce platform is Shopify. And we did list a few items on Etsy, which is a program run by Amazon. I think it's actually owned by Amazon, isn't it?
Yeah, I know Etsy usually buy little artist type of artistic things. So
yeah. So we started listing our scarves on there, and I started to build an audience in the USA, and it was really interesting to see where the orders were coming from. Like I'd get a series of orders out of Miami, for example, for cashmeres, and then next minute I'd be getting some from Seattle or Chicago or some of the Midwest towns, Minneapolis or some places in Kentucky. It was sort of really weird, this whole where it was coming from, and there was no rhyme or reason to it. And I thought, this is this is sort of interesting. So whilst I'm not exporting massive amounts of stuff to the US at the moment, I do have a few very loyal customers in New York who regularly purchase my stuff. So we know they're very fashionable and very cool people in New York, right?
Yep.
So that's sort of nice. And then I started to get a series of purchases out of places like Austria and Sweden, and then Switzerland and Germany. So, I started to hit the European continent. And again, it's not sheep stations, but, this constant interest in what we're doing and connections with countries like that. And then of course I started to get quite a bit out of England, and particularly as gifting, which was really interesting. So that they would be buying it and sending it to somebody else in England, or somebody here would be buying it and sending it to family in England or Scotland or Ireland or Wales. So it sort of built from there. I actually have also participated in shows in Shenzhen in China. We've been to LA, we've been to London now. We just recently appeared in London. We've done Auckland, and I totally love the whole New Zealand vibe with their designers, because they're really quite unique. And yeah, different than you'll find anywhere else in the world. So my plan is very soon, and after Australian Fashion Week, which will be in early May this year, we'll be going to jumping on a plane and going to Brussels and having a show there, having one in Dublin and one in London. So we've got 3 shows coming up in late May over there, and that'll be really interesting, because that'll be giving us I'm really going to be then searching for wholesalers in and around London and agents who can service into the European continent, and that'll give me a fairly good idea of pretty quickly how, whether it's a much broader interest or whether it's really sort of a very specific crowd that like my stuff. you know, it's so hard to know, you know.
Yes.
So that'll be interesting to see, and we'll be looking for, I guess, contacts over there at the time and talking to agents and etc. to see, you know, what we can do.
Yeah. And I guess that's sort of, like, is it a very specific market or is it a much broader market, but they just don't know about it yet?
Yeah. Which is an interesting question, because it's tough when, you know, like the bulk of our advertising or, you know, like informational stuff is on Instagram, and we still do have some stuff on Etsy and Instagram and Facebook. And so it's such a busy, noisy market. It's really hard to know where you're getting to, if you know what I mean, who you're getting to and how many. So, yeah, I mean, it's the $64 million question, isn't it? You know, like, what's your market? Everybody says to me, who's your market? And I'm like, anyone who'll buy it.
Yeah, certainly. And do you engage in other activities like supply or, produce in other countries of your products?
So, yeah, this last collection I did, we did here in Western Australia. Prior to that, I'd done one collection in India, two collections, sorry, in India, and then two prior to that here in Australia. So I've had a bit of a mix of the two countries this year, and I'm just sending all my stuff off now to get my samples completed. I will have to do in India because, and I find them really good to work with. I have ventured into China for a couple of things. But the market there is so massive and there's so much option. It's really, really hard to know where to start. You really need to be, I think you need to go and have a look yourself, quite frankly. We really, like when we went to Shenzhen now that was 2018, I went to Shenzhen and did the art fashion show. It was a massive fair and absolutely amazing. And like totally surprising how sophisticated and incredibly switched on they are about stuff. We did make connection with a few people, and we got approached by a group to set up shops in their malls right across China. And they wanted me to set up shops in China. And I'm a pretty small little business, right? And they own 27,000 malls across the country. And they, you know, so the potential for me, the possibility for me to do that was really, it would have been too difficult and financially out of my scope. So and it would have been a really huge gamble as well. Obviously we would have staged it, but to test the market, but that was interesting. But typically now, this year I will make in India again, just simply, and I would like to continue to make in Australia and export fully made Australian products. But this year in Australia, there's one problem with staff, two problem with parts. There's, you know, like there's stuff that we wanted to get done here that, you know, we just couldn't. The pattern makers, the grading machines, they've all, you know, like over as everything does, eventually they need some care and attention, and you can't get parts to fix anything. So it's been a real difficult, well, in a way, a difficult call for me, because I do love the whole idea of being all Australian. But having said that, I found India to be very sympathetic to my ideas about eco-friendly products, sustainable products. We always work in products that, so not that we would advocate this, but anything that goes into landfill, very often the polyesters take 30 to 40 years to break down, whereas viscose will take 1 to 2 years. So I try to use viscose in all of my, and it's a recycled product. So I try to use that as much as I can, or I use natural fibers such as linens and cottons, which of course are very popular in the summer months here anyway. So yeah, but I love working with India. We regularly go across there, and we've checked the workshops and factories out over there, which is always lots of fun, because it's always full of people yelling and moving around and doing busy stuff. And India itself is such a fascinating country. I totally love it, totally. And there's so much to see and do over there. It's just beyond incredible, really.
It's very rich with culture, and all your senses are turned on, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, so interesting.
Okay, so what would you say was your unique value proposition of Kirrikin products in international markets? Or why do you think, I mean, you kind of alluded to it before, but why do you think international consumers buy your products?
So I think for a couple of reasons. One is it's unique. It's unique everywhere in the world. Our culture is unique, of course. But I like to use bright, colourful artwork and clothing, and I like to tell the story. So there's a couple of things. I think people connect with a story. They get that these are ancient stories. They're stories about, how our people lived and what things they used and how they made a life. I think more mature markets have an interest is a growing interest in the Indigenous world, not just Australia, like right across the world. Yep. Indigenous products across the world are becoming more and more in favour. And, I just like to think that I make nice things that people want to have.
Yes, I think they are very nice.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. Okay, excellent. And so just getting to my last question, what are your plans for future international expansion? I know you mentioned this, the trade conference or the fashion show that you're going to in Brussels. Anything else? Or
so one thing I have in my mind that I would really love to do is create a platform that makes specifically Indigenous products from Australia accessible throughout the world. So there would be wholesalers or agents could delve into and see what products are available in Australia by maker, and use it really as a connection tool. Because I think there is so much happening in our space that it's, it's a bit unfair that we keep it to ourselves, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, definitely.
So that's one thing that's on my radar to do, and I would deeply love to hit up somebody and like have a shop, like probably an independent store somewhere in London that's stocked my products, because apparently Londoners go on a lot of holidays.
Yes.
So, and what else who else would need resort wear other than holiday makers, right? Well, not just holiday makers, of course, but so that's my plans for the future. I will continue to work with India because I always source my fabrics out of India, just because I love the sheer variety and beauty of them. We work with, and I love this story too. I work with a group. I went looking when I first set up the scarf line. I went looking for the nicest cashmeres I could find, and funny enough, I found it in a country called Kashmir.
Yes, of course.
So that was really interesting. But what I didn't know at the time, we just sort of looked at them and went, wow, they're really beautiful and soft and delicious. But what I didn't know at the time was that this particular family had been harvesting cashmere wool for 7 generations in the Kashmir Valley. It's war torn, so it sits between Pakistan and India, and has been I think a hot point because of the argument over who actually owns it for years. So the families that I work with are very often dodging bullets and missiles and stuff. And they're very thankful that we continue to order cashmere from them because we keep them alive. Probably not just me, I'm sure they supply to other companies as well, but it was a really interesting story, and I was sort of a bit shocked when I delved into the story with the guy I deal with. So the fellow I deal with actually now lives in Delhi, but he was telling me about his own family and how his mum and dad live in the Kashmir Valley, and they run this mill that mills this gorgeous cashmere and has done forever. But you know, it's not safe for him to go and even visit his own parents sometimes because of the fighting. And yeah, so that's an interesting story. And of course, you know, that sort of stuff goes on all over the world, and it's really nice to know that we can actually help people survive through some of that stuff too, you know.
Yeah, certainly. Oh, okay. Well, thank you very much, Amanda, for spending your time for this podcast today. Really appreciate it. And I believe our students will also appreciate your knowledge and you sharing that with them. Okay, so thank you.
Thank you very much.